Hey guys, Warren here again. It's at nighttime. You might be able to hear the cicadas. Well, for sure you can hear my puppies. They're going to talk too. I want to talk to you about short stories. Short stories, every story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you only have a beginning, it doesn't work. If any of you have seen Quentin Tarantino's film Pulp Fiction, you know that that film starts off at the end and then goes back to the beginning. Nothing that tricky is going to happen in the three short stories I'm talking about you tonight, about. The first story is Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. You can find that on page 193. I can't tell if that shows up on the screen, but I'm hoping it does. Page 193 in your book. The second story is very, very brief. Maybe it's 2 pages. Max by Ron Carlson. I have an affinity for him, maybe because he graduated from University of Utah, which is where I graduated from. I never met him, but the man is funny. So we'll have a serious one, a funny one, and another serious one. The third story is, and Max is found on page 97. The third story is called The Story of an Hour, and it's by Kate Chopin. Now I know her name looks like it says Chopin, but you pronounce it Chopin, and that's found on page 15 in the book. And this will be the last reading assignment I give you for the semester, because then you'll have your final project. All right. In The Cask of Amontillado, I want you to focus on whether or not you can believe the narrator, because this is a story that has an unreliable narrator. And I want you to look for clues as to why you can't trust the narrator. It's my belief and my interpretation that he is bragging about this incident in his life. Oh, and it's some people will say Amontillado, and that's because they don't read Spanish, but it's Amontillado. All right, so the Cask of Amontillado. Amontillado is a type of liquor or wine. And focus on why it is that you can't trust this narrator. And he is going to be with his friend, Fortunado. Fortunado, which Edgar Allan Poe knew means fortunate. See if Fortunado is Fortunado or desafortunado, or unfortunate in that story. All right, also, there's going to be a moment, there's a lot of drinking going on in this story because they're checking out a cask of liquor. There's going to be a mention of Masons. And Masons are a fraternity that they're still around, very popular, and the narrator is not a Mason, or if he is, he's a very, very bad Mason. Masons actually have one thing that they require of their members, and that is that they believe in some sort of higher being, and then they agree to help each other and their communities. Now, Fortunado is going to drink a whole bottle. He's going to drink many bottles, okay? But at one point, drink a whole bottle, and then he's going to make a Masonic sign and ask the narrator if he understands what he just did. And he says, no. And Fortunado says, oh, you're not a Mason. And the narrator is going to pull out a trowel, a literal trowel, because Masons have different signs, and the sign that probably Fortunado made is the signs of death penalty that the Masons took out in 1990, so only 30 years ago. And these are the signs. I can show them to you. Slitting across the throat, which I think is what Fortunado does in the story, meaning he's killed it. Slitting across the heart and the lungs, or I'm not tall enough, So imagine this is my belly, slitting across the belly. Why do I know this? Why? Because I'm a strange person, all right? Anyway, so that's what's being referred to are signs of different ways of dying if you reveal secrets. All right, so in the next story, Max, I want you to realize that unfortunately Ron Carlson wrote this with Max the dog. The dog is called Max, and the friend is called Max, and so that can be a little bit confusing. However, I want you to see that the narrator hates this friend, just as in Cask of Amontillado, and what he's going to do to try to humiliate the friend and his most recent girlfriend by using the dog Max. Alright, so both of these first two stories are written in first person. First person means that you say I all the way through, that the person telling the story is talking about him or herself. I. Now the third story is written in the third person, and it's third person omniscient. So you have a narrator that is not part of the story, but can see inside the mind or the minds of the different characters. And in this case, this narrator can see inside the minds of all of the characters. In the story of an hour, guess how much time takes place? 1 hour. Only an hour. And Kate Chopin is an early feminist writer in American literature. She, quiet puppy, quiet. Give me one more second. She had some axes to grind when it came to the oppression of women. And she's someone who I actually look up to. And so I'd like you to make sure that you look up her biography and see what it is that she did with her life. She raised children, but she also, while doing that, produced some very, very beautiful literature. Now, in the story of an hour, it's really about the idea of what is the relationship between a wife and her husband. And Kate Chopin had problems with the traditional view of marriage. And traditionally in Western culture, what we have, if you go back to Old Testament times, we have the idea that men actually owned women. They were property. And children were also property. That's why in the law of Moses, if your child talks back to you, you can kill the child. Can you imagine? I wouldn't be here today, would you? All right. But people typically do not like to be treated as property. And the wife in this story is going to get some bad news about her husband. And she's going to be happy that she no longer has to pay the marital debt. And the story doesn't explicitly use those words, but the marital debt was the traditional idea that went on for thousands of years under patriarchy, that whenever the husband wanted to have sex with the wife, she was obliged and obligated to have sex with him. All right, so I'd like you to read these stories and keep an eye out for symbols. Besides the Masonic one in the first story, they're going to go into catacombs. Keep an eye out as to how the imagery gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker as they go through the catacombs. In Max, keep an eye out for all of the material items that the friend brings to the house to show off with, along with his trophy girlfriend. All right? And then in the story of an hour, I want you to focus on what the protagonist is seeing when she gets the bad news and goes to her bedroom to cry, as she looks out the window and sees a blue sky with some clouds in it. So take special notes of those things, and I hope you enjoy the stories. They're all very, 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 very well written. The story of an hour is about 100 years old. Max is relatively new. It was in the 80s. And the Cask of Amontillado is 100 years old as well. But as I said before, literature are works of art that stand the test of time. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you.